no one really cares about second place. Winners get everything, and losers get nothing. This is the mantra that entire brands have been built upon. Ferrari, Porsche, McLaren, Mercedes. Only victory decides who will be the winner and who will be the loser. And in the 60s, the Ford GT was the best because it didn't fucking lose. Today, the Ford GT is an iconic vintage sports car with a large fan base. But in the 60s, it was unstoppable. In racing form, this bolide obliterated anything it faced. Its performance was so dominating, so monolithic that it sent everyone back to the drawing board. It changed the rules. This car proved that Ford is a great company and catapulted them into one of the most respected names in the sports car universe. Ford created a monster. Its name was the Ford GT40. And this is how it was born. Today our story begins in 1963. At that time, the kings of Le Mans were the red Ferrari stallions. Ford Motor Chief Henry Ford II dreamed of big wins in endurance events, but he could only boast of the Galaxy Series coupes that dominated the NASCAR championships. To reach the highest international level, more advanced models were needed, specially designed sports prototypes. It so happened that the Ferrari company was experiencing financial difficulties, and Enzo Ferrari put his brainchild up for sale. Ford decided to buy Ferrari and offered a fabulous deal at that time. The amount? $18 million. At first, the proud Italian agreed as he knew that he needed large investments, and the more so that they decided to keep him as the honorary president of Ferrari. After several months of careful negotiations, Henry Ford was ready to make a deal with Enzo Ferrari to buy his company. His people almost managed to persuade the Italians, but at the last moment, Enzo learned that he couldn't make decisions without consulting with Ford's management, and in a rude manner, kicked the Americans out of the office door. Naturally, this behavior of Ferrari made Henry very angry, and he decided to prove that he could achieve success in racing on his own. Ford set a task for his team to create a car that would bypass Ferrari cars in the endurance race 24 Hours of Le Mans, and thus would rub Enzo Ferrari's nose in it. It was the start of a major war between Ford and Ferrari. Ford's aim was to create the #1 best performing car in the world. This is the moment that changed Ford's history forever. After a failed attempt to buy Ferrari, the Detroit automaker was looking for a way to enter the sport. Since Ford had no experience in building them, he had to enlist the help of Eric Broadley, a British entrepreneur, engineer, founder, and chief designer of Lola Cars, a race car manufacturer and engineering company. As insignificant as the firm was, its mid-engine race car, the Lola Mark VI or Lola GT, was properly configured, had an aluminum body, and used a Ford V8 engine. It was one of the most advanced race cars of the time, and it performed well at Le Mans in 1963. Although, due to low gearing and low revs, the car didn't finish. But it was essentially the prototype from which the Ford GT40 was developed from. The agreement with Broadley included a one-year partnership between the Ford company and Broadley, and the sale of the two Lola Mark VI chassis to Ford. Henry also hired former Aston Martin team manager John Wyer to form the development team, and engineer Roy Lunn, who ran Ford's advanced vehicle division, and who had designed the 1962 Mustang I mid-engine roadster with a 1.7-liter V4, becoming the only Dearborn-based engineer with experience with that configuration. With this team of Broadley, Wyer, and Lunn, Ford began work on a new racing car called the Ford GT40. The best European components were purchased for the prototype: 15-inch Barani spoke wheels, Colati transmission in Italy, metal-elastic driveshaft couplings, and Girling brake calipers in England. All these parts had to be perfectly matched to each other, as the slightest defect could lead to the car going off the track. According to the rules of Le Mans, it was forbidden to change the main components of the car after the start. To create an independent suspension, engineers used a computer, a tool that had never been used in car design before. It allowed them to evaluate the car's movement in different projections and at different angles. The choice of engine was obvious. In the middle of the GT40's body stood the most powerfully modified Fairlane V8 at the time, with a displacement of almost 4.2 liters. Tuned to run for 24 hours, the engine produced 350 horsepower. But the true masterpiece was the design of the sports car. Every square centimeter of the car was designed to cut through the air. A long, beveled nose, a raised and trimmed tail. It was painted in dark blue and white with matte paint on the hood to keep the glare from interfering with the pilots. The height of the body from the ground did not exceed 40.5 inches. By the way, for this reason, the number 40 appears in the name of the car. Officially, the car was called the Ford GT, and GT40 was more of a nickname. By 1963, a streamlined coupe called the GT40 was created by a joint effort. This bolide was based on a steel monocoque to which fiberglass body panels were attached to. Thus, it was possible to make the car light, 907 kilograms. Taking inspiration from the Ford Mustang, the 4.7-liter V8 was refined and raised its power to 385 horsepower and paired it with a 5-speed manual transmission. Also, independent suspension and 4-wheel disc brakes were installed. Nevertheless, its development was decidedly unsystematic. Engineers improvised, and success was far from guaranteed. The bolide was created in a record 11 months. On tests, the coupe developed 315 kilometers per hour and accelerated to 160 kilometers an hour in 9 seconds. And in April of 1964, several cars were brought to Le Mans for tests. Despite all the efforts of the team, the first copies showed themselves at the races badly. It almost turned out to be a tragedy. On long straight lines, the nose of the car lacked downforce. At high speeds, the GT40 could accelerate to 320 kilometers an hour, but wanted to soar above 273, which was very early in the world of racing aerodynamic systems. One GT40 crashed, and the other was severely damaged. As a matter of urgency, the bolides were sent to the UK for rework. They were redesigned at the front, which solved the problem. But it was not possible to get rid of childhood diseases completely. For the first time, the Ford GT40 took part in the races in May 1964 at the 1,000 kilometers of Nürburgring. The new car had to show itself very fast, but after taking second place at the beginning of the competition, he went off the track because of suspension failure. 3 weeks later, at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, all 3 Ford cars came off the track due to technical problems. The first one ran for just 5 hours and caught fire. An hour later, the second car's gearbox broke. The third car lasted 14 hours, but the gearbox failed. It was a real disaster. Reliability was eluding Ford. The design was still very raw. Henry Ford II was not used to giving up, and after a series of failures, decided to turn to his longtime partner, ex-racer, and legend of his time, Carroll Shelby. The Ford GT racing project was placed entirely in the hands of the automotive designer and was never the same again. Shelby American and its more militant spirit gave the GT40 program the character and performance it sorely needed. Carroll Shelby never called himself a technical genius. His strategy was to bring in talented people and put them to work. And one of those talents was racer Ken Miles, who had to live next to the car for a few months and test the performance and handling of the Ford GT40 on the track time after time. To start, Miles drove the first version of the car to diagnose its problem: ship. He characterized the car after a couple of laps. A team from Ford's aerospace division was brought in to build the second generation of the car. Computer data analysis showed a lack of air in the underhood space. At least 76 horsepower was being lost due to an unsuccessful duct design. So Miles and Chief Engineer Phil Remington modernized the air ducts as well as the lubrication system for the GT40. They also used Halobrand magnesium alloy wheels, lightening them by almost 14 kilograms. They put wider Goodyear tires on the rear wheels of the Ford GT40 Mark II to improve traction, and they took powerful front brakes to make the car faster in the corners. In addition, instead of the small block 4.2-liter V8, Shelby put a monster 7-liter unit, which had been used previously in the Cobra cars. In this configuration, in February of 1965, in the 2,000-kilometer Daytona race, the Ford GT40 Mark II took its first victory with Ken Miles and Lloyd Ruby at the wheel. A month later, Ford cars took second place behind the winner Chaparral in the sports class, and first place in the prototype class at the 12-hour race at Sebring. It started off promisingly, but the rest of the season was disappointing. Although, at the Le Mans race, the GT40 set a lap record, but unfortunately, literally all of the cars fell victim to problems with the head gasket, clutch, and gearbox. And of the 6 Ford cars that started, not a single one made it to the finish line. Over the next year, Miles, Shelby, and other engineers continued to perfect the GT40 kit car. Miles spent days and nights doing laps, throwing the car into skids in the corners and accelerating to 320 kilometers per hour on the straights. With each lap, Miles got to know the car better and better, and the efforts of the project team finally began to yield results. Development continued, progress became significant, and the experience gained in 1964 and 1965 allowed the 7-liter Mark II to dominate the new 1966 season. The Ford team met the Daytona race in full force, though this was the year that Daytona was held in a 24-hour format. But that didn't stop the GT40 cars from taking first, second, and third place. After the race, driver of one of the cars, Lloyd Ruby, said, "The Mark II is a really good car. It's got a lot of power, it's fast, and it handles damn well." A month later, at the 12 Hours of Sebring, Ford cars again took the top 3 spots, with the X1 Roadster first, the Mark II second, and the Mark I third. At the start of the season, all GT40 cars had performed admirably, but Ford has one more race to go. One more race that will determine the outcome. One more race that will set the stage. One more race that will determine the winner and loser. The 24 Hour of Le Mans. The updated GT40 Mark II has been prepared for Le Mans, and it has been heavily modified. A huge 7-liter V8 was accelerated to an incredible 485 horsepower. On straight lines, Ford bolides easily developed up to 340 kilometers per hour. In this GT40, for the first time used a 2-point system of fixing calipers, which allowed you to change discs in just a minute. At the end of the day, Shelby engineers worked together to put in a 4-speed gearbox with reinforced gears that made the unit much stronger and stiffer without losing any speed. The cars were as ready as ever, It was impossible to compete with such monsters. June 19, 1966, Le Mans. A sensational victory. 3 Ford GT40s crossing the finish line at the same time. It was a real triumph. The crowd cheered. Henry Ford had achieved what he wanted. He had proved that his cars were better than Ferraris. This victory was the culmination of 3 years of engineering, design, and research to create a winning car. Ford's team used all its power to win. This Le Mans race is considered one of the most famous and prestigious long-distance races of all time.